Good morning, everyone. Um, Before we start with our distinguished panel, I just want to take a moment and, as a non-ELNet employee here, most cordially thank the entire ELNet staff and leadership for this wonderful policy conference. I run an Israeli research organization, NGO Monitor, but I am originally European. I was born and raised in Serbia, and I have been saying for decades that the Israel and Europe relations are oftentimes underestimated and not discussed enough and not invested enough. So organizations like ELNet pave the way, and they make space for this incredibly important and strategic conversation. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Our panel today seemingly deals with a softer issue, which is anti-Semitism and combating this type of hate. But the ELNet professionals and us deliberately framed it in the title as global Intifada and how we should fight the surge, because we do believe that the two are intimately intertwined and connected. The Israeli government submitted and presented a report to the Israeli President Isaac Herzog a couple of months ago, in which they said that in 2024 there was a 340% surge in anti-Semitism worldwide. And this information is backed, obviously, by similar reports by ADL, by the European Union's Fundamental Agency for Human Rights. But I'm not sure that anyone in this room actually needs reports and surveys since October the 7th, because everyone here has directly or indirectly felt it on our skin, online, and in the media. But I would like today to reframe the conversation. You know, before October the 7th, the metrics that we use to measure anti-Semitic incidents and how violent they are, to my mind, are obsolete post-October the 7th. Now, I'll challenge myself on that. In terms of the manifestations of contemporary anti-Semitism, there is nothing new out there. What is new is the magnitude and the volume, and also how unapologetically it is being unleashed in literally every sphere of our life. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition on anti-Semitism, which is the only definition that hundreds of institutions and tens of governments have adopted. The European Union adopts it as its main definition on anti-Semitism and bases its strategic plan on combating anti-Semitism on it, and so do most of the other EU member states, clearly stipulates what contemporary anti-Semitism today is. And I want to deliberately revamp here what it really is, because I think it is one of the most useful still, even October the 7th tools, in understanding what the challenge that lies in front of us is. The IHRA working definition says anti-Semitism comes both from the right and the left. Now, we all know that there is neo-Nazi and far-right and white supremacist anti-Semitism, but what the definition also does is stipulates concrete examples of what anti-Semitism constitutes coming from more liberal narratives. Holding Israel to double standards and judging Israel by double standards is to be considered anti-Semitic. Accusing a French Jew going to the shul or just going around about his or her business for the activities of the State of Israel is to be considered anti-Semitism. Holding a Jewish community in Germany or in Strasbourg or anywhere in Europe collectively guilty for what the State of Israel does is to be considered anti-Semitism. Accusing Israel of Nazism, right, is to be considered anti-Semitic. The difference in how we deal with the two types of anti-Semitism is when it comes to the anti-Semitism coming and the hate coming from the right, our societies know how to properly identify it, how to properly label it, and we have legal and other mechanisms that know how to persecute it and sanction it. Does it mean there is none coming from the right? Absolutely not. And we know that a lot of the anti-Semitic incidents, most certainly before October the 7th, came from the far right. However, when it comes to the anti-Semitism coming from more liberal or left-leaning ideologies, we have none of these systems and mechanisms in place. And to my mind, that is where the challenge lies. Now, I almost think that post-October the 7th, using the term anti-Semitism doesn't do it justice. I think we need to speak about violence against Jews and political warfare. Let us deconstruct the contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism, to my mind, today. We have, on October the 7th, seen an immediate launch of the starvation libel, right? The war just started, and everyone was still trying to comprehend the magnitude of the massacre on October the 7th, one that inside of the Jewish community in Israel, we label as the worst pogrom against Jews since the Holocaust. And yet, the international community and human rights organizations have immediately launched the starvation libel against Israel on October the 7th. On October the 14th, a similar genocide libel was launched, accusing Israel that it is perpetuating a genocide. Similar apartheid libels have been around for a while. What was followed was a criminal case against Israel at the International Criminal Court in The Hague and the International Court of Justice. Encampments on American campuses right after October the 7th. Slurs and violent demonstrations against Jews where slogans from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, and there's no other way of hearing that other than inciting against Israel and calling for its destructions, could be heard freely on the streets of every capital around the world. But let me add a few more to that. Legal cases against the US, the British, the Dutch, and the German government, trying to prevent them from providing Israel with military aid under the guise that these governments are violating human rights and international law. These are the faces of contemporary attack on the global Jewish community and Israel. Why? Because they're weaponizing what we know is as human rights, and they're there to serve as a complementary political warfare to the physical warfare, basically normalizing it and oftentimes romanticizing it. How many times have we actually seen that the discussion is being legitimized whether Hamas are terrorists or militants? I'll remind you of the BBC case, right? And we see this everywhere around the world. And I would like to frame this morning's discussion exactly as such. I don't think we can eradicate all the haters ever around the world. But I do think that the challenge that lies ahead of us is how we regulate the public space in which they operate. So let me ask you, and we'll do the same question for everyone. When we speak about the global Intifada, do you think it's a fringe movement, or do you think that it is a growing ideological format, one that threatens not only the legitimacy of the State of Israel and the global Jewish community, but rather attacks our societies and democracies as we know it?
Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to join you in thanking all the team of Elnet for this important conversation today. We are speaking about a threat that is endangering the future of our societies. And you were saying that you intervene as a non-Elnet member. I would say we are to speak about anti-Semitism, and I will do it as a non-Jew. But this is an issue for all our societies. It's not an issue for the Jewish community. It's an issue for our Western democracies as such. And you're right to say that the 7th of October... you're fully right to say that the 7th of October has unleashed a new dimension of this threat, of course. And by the way, I'm speaking also about this as a former philosophy teacher. I think there is also a very deep question in the fact that the victim of the 7th of October is becoming the guilty one. This reverse in the accusation is exactly what we're speaking about when we speak about anti-Semitism in the past and today. But the 7th of October has not been a beginning. And I would not completely agree that before the 7th of October, all anti-Semitic hatred would come from the far right. Of course, this has been the case in the past of the 20th century. But if I look at the recent history of my country, France, this has all been very clear already in past years and decades, with the rise of an anti-Semitism and a violent anti-Semitism coming from Islamist movements in France. In 2012, let's never forget about it, the Ozar Hatorah school in Toulouse was the place where, for the first time in our recent history, children, people were killed because they were Jewish. It was in France, and it was not coming from the far right. And it was not even coming from, you say that there is now a liberal anti-Semitism. I would deny everyone in the world spreading anti-Semitism the right to call himself or herself a liberal. But I mean, this is, and the fact is we see it now today also on the left in the political spectrum. That's true. But we have to face that this is already a sign of a deep change in the way our societies are organizing themselves. There is, as you say, there is a global warfare. It's, of course, ideological warfare spread by anti-Semitism. And the question you were asking is, does it come from a fringe or is it a deeply rooted movement? I would say, first of all, it doesn't need to be coming from a majority to be a huge danger. And when I see some friends in France being Jewish and obliged to withdraw their names at the entrance of their doors, it doesn't need to be a threat coming from a majority to be a threat endangering your life and the life of your family. So even if it would come from a fringe, it would already be an existential danger. But it's not coming from a fringe. It's actually warfare that is very well organized and developing in the depths of our society. It's well organized to seize two main places where the future will be shaped. And I would say from my experience, and I will end up there, I met this threat in two different spaces. The first one is as a teacher. I met it at school. It's been now a long time since Georges Bensoussan and many other teachers, academicians, universitarians were warning France about the lost territories of Republic. This was in 2005. In 2005, and they were already saying that in many places in France, it was difficult to pass on the memory of the Shoah and to teach students about the Shoah because students would then oppose to you and oppose you with explicit denial. This has been organized. The place where culture, history, remembrance, knowledge should be transmitted was one of the first places to be determined as a priority for the ones willing to spread this anti-Semitism. And I decided to confront it with many other, many teachers are leading this fight today. And by the way, are endangering themselves. You know, half of the French teachers recognize that they already decided to self-censor themselves in their classrooms because they would feel in danger after Samuel Paty and Dominique Bernard. You can perfectly understand this. But the fact is, others decide to speak up and to continue the fight. And now they should know in a country like mine that the state will be behind them when for too long the state and the administration were on the side of the pas de vague. Please be silent, no problem, no incident. We don't want to hear anything about this. We should build a state. We should build governments. We should build administrations. We should build hierarchies that will always backup teachers on the ground fighting against anti-Semitism and not weakening them as it has been too often the case in the recent past. It's the reason why in a recent political campaign I had the occasion to go myself to Sciences Po Paris, because Sciences Po was, as too often we were in a way it had become an habit that the far left was occupying Sciences Po, like we saw in many universities in Western democracies, including in the US, with this kind of slogans that you were expressing from the river to the seas. This was a motto in Sciences Po, and by the way, Jewish students were excluded from amphitheaters in Sciences Po because, exactly as you say, they were accused of being complicits of genocide. So I went to Sciences Po and I went to fight, and we need to fight and to avoid now this reflex of letting this down as it has been in the past. And the final place of warfare is our institutions. And I can get back to it later if you want. But in the European Parliament, where I'm now acting as a member, I see it on a daily basis. We are too naive in front of this ideological warfare that is now making its pass through our institutions and using the principles of our democracies to turn it against themselves. And this is what is happening concretely now. We can get it with more details if you wish later on, but I wish to listen to my other to the other speakers, so I will finish there. Sorry for having been too long.
Thank you very much. Is your experience from an Italian perspective any different, or are the challenges similar?
Good morning, everyone, first of all. No, unfortunately, it's not any better. I'm seriously concerned. I don't think it's a fringe. I think, paradoxically, October the 7th was the alibi, was the good reason to unleash an anti-Semitism that has always been there. The anti-Semitic beast never dies. It's there under the surface, and when a good chance comes, it raises its heads. And I see that from a number of, and I mean, there are many clues to come to that conclusion. I was at the Jewish community in Milan to celebrate the anniversary of the State of Israel. And most of the friends who welcomed me to the party thanked me to be there. And I said, there's no need to thank me. I've always been here. And one said to me, we thought we had many friends, but one by one they're disappearing, and we're so happy to see you here. And that made me think a lot. Friends are decreasing in numbers. One of my colleagues in the Italian Senate is Senator Liliana Segre. She was born in 1930. She's a survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau. She's a senator for life. She's considered a, moral authority in the country. And she's been under police protection for years now, a 94-year-old woman. This is not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. But it tells you that they were waiting. And now they have a good reason to say what they say. There was a movie shot to tell about Liliana's story. And the owner of the cinema in Milan, where the show should have been displayed, decided not to because he was afraid of potential disorders. And it is not acceptable that a cinema in Milan is not able or not willing to have a film regarding Liliana Segre. Only a few weeks ago, some Israeli customers were literally thrown out of restaurant in Naples because the restaurant owner felt obliged to tell them what she thought about the situation in Gaza. Now, I think, I'm not surprised in a way because I think, I'm a gay man. And I know that inclusion and respect are often rational efforts. People try to sympathize, to empathize with people who are different, but there is something at the level of your stomach when someone doesn't look like you, doesn't pray like you, doesn't love like you. There's something here saying that something is fundamentally not right. Then you are educated, then you think, then you grow older and try to make that rational effort to include people who are different within your life. But when someone tells you things in a certain way, that voice at the level of your stomach comes up and says, probably the things you feel are not so wrong as they told you. And when I listen to the story of how the situation in Gaza and the situation in Israel is told, I feel that something is fundamentally wrong. I had a discussion with people from my party. We are pro-Israel. I'm sure of where I stand. Because there were, some of my colleagues that I hold in very high esteem, saying to me, Ivan, this is going too far. We have to say something against what's happening in Gaza. And their arguments, I respected those. I think they said things that made sense somehow, but they were completely out of the context. No one was mentioning the existential threat under which Israel and Israeli people live. No one thought that, differently from what happens to my country, we don't live with neighbors that have a plan, a program, a strategic program to erase us from the geographic maps. We don't live with missiles coming daily, from the north, from the south, from the west and the east, because, people want to destroy you and they want to say that your country never existed and never had the right to exist. Because if we told the story, considering these, which are not details, I think the whole situation would be looked at from a very different angle. So what do we have to do? I think, first of all, we had to go to the Jewish community celebrations. Even if the numbers are going down, I will be there. And if people complimented you for something that looks brave, you should tell them that it's not. It's just normal. It's what people ought to do normally. And I would go back to education, as a politician that I liked a lot in the past used to say in the UK, because I think we're losing touch of what really happened and what it is happening. And then, to be honest with you, I think that as friends of Israel, and I consider myself to be a very strong friend, I would also try to tell the story of a country which is not as, the beauty of Israel, and the reason why I think it's so important is that Israel is a very plural society, which is surrounded by societies which are not. And this story, I think, doesn't come very clear to the rest of the world. And some, in a very bad faith, they built on this. I agree with you when you say that, it is anti-Semitic to ask the Italian Jews to say that they are not in alignment or in agreement with the government of Israel. But that has happened, and it was a former prime minister of Italy to say so. And he's he claims to be a progressive person. Giuseppe Conte recently asked the Italian Jewish community. But we are not told enough of people in Israel, for example, asking the government to do more for the hostages. We are not told enough that there is another Israel. You know, I'm a politician, and so, of course, I have my political positions, and if I were in Israel, I would not support the current government. But very few people remember that there is another story, there is another point of view, there is another perspective. So the things that are not popular, let's say so, some choices that are difficult to accept for some part of the public opinion, well, they're not counterbalanced by the story of a portion of another democratic country, the only democratic country in the area where people think differently. And I think that would also help.
Thank you. It's interesting that you basically spoke about the perception, right, and how the public selectively tells the story about Israel. And I think it's quite befitting. We just marked 80 years since the end of the Second World War, to quote Churchill here, who said that the lie takes it a few minutes to go around the world, and in that time, the truth hasn't even had time to put on its pants. So, Idan, from an Israeli perspective, right? It's one challenge to discuss this with European officials. But what is Israel's stand? How do we fight this army of half-truths, lies, distorted truths, and proper bona fide propaganda that is being thrown at us as a way of warfare, right? Which is basically weakening our position to defend ourselves and to fight ourselves, when we have to, on top of a physical war, be busy with how we are perceived globally, and to what extent that endangers the physical safety or even of the global Jewish communities who are not citizens of Israel.
Thank you, Olga. I want to join you and thank Elnet. I've been working with Elnet for a few years now, and I got to witness the immense impact that this organization has at first hand, so thank you for what you do. I want to start off by saying that October 7th was a really harsh wake-up call for all the reasons that we all know, but also for those who still believed that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is a reaction, that it maybe is retaliation for something that the Jewish people do or that Israel does, and the fact that Hamas started an unprovoked war with a hideous massacre of citizens, of kids, of women, I think should have made clear to those who still thought that it's something that Israel does, that if we do different, then the world will change, that the perspective of Europe and other countries of Israel will immediately change. If only there is a two-state solution, if only there's no more settlements, if only there's anything, it should change. And anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred. It's never provoked, it's never a reaction, it's never retaliation, and it's never justified. Anti-Semitism exists because it has existed for so many years. And I think that what October 7th needs to teach us, among other things, is to stop looking for the reasoning for it, or stop looking for ways in which if we only change our policy, and we can discuss different policies, but no policy will make anti-Semitism go away. And I want to illustrate two main challenges that we're all dealing with as the Jewish people and Israel, and then also offer a solution to this, what I agree is a global intifada, but not only of warfare, but also of education, ideas, values, and the destruction of values of the Western society. So we are now facing two major shifts that are new since the beginning, since the end of World War II. You know, in my previous position as a deputy foreign minister under the Bennett-Lapid government, I went on an official visit to Brussels, and I met with the local Jewish community, and something that a local woman said to me really resonated with me and stuck. She told me that the protective umbrella, the protective veil of the Shoah is thinning, and that it's very noticeable. And she was right. That's a process that is undergoing and has been undergoing for the past decades, and it might be inevitable. The second challenge that we're all facing is this new disruption, and I think that many view this point in time as something temporary. Maybe it will all die down as soon enough, maybe next year, maybe the old order that we've been accustomed to is going to go back to what we used to know, but it's not. The world is changing, and there's a new order that is forming for the first time since the end of World War II. And it puts everything in jeopardy, and it changes the dynamics, and Israel and the Jewish people are caught in the midst of it. And so I personally believe that the challenges are yet to come, and everything is evolving. Also, people tend to say in Israel, oh no, what if World War III erupts? And I've been telling people we are in the midst of World War III. It just is different than what you expect it to look like based on the previous two wars. But we are at the moment in World War III, and things are shifting. And one of the aspects of this new war is a war on Western values and a war against liberal nations and democracies. And the reason why everything erupted so massively on October 7th is because they have been cultivating it for so long. And we've been advocating for it. We've been saying this to the world because it's a very well-organized machine of propaganda, of education, of budgets. And so maybe for the first time people say, oh, it was just a catalyst. October 7th was just the reasoning for people to say, oh, look at Israel. They're doing a ground maneuver, a campaign in Gaza. We have to rally against it. But the signs, as you mentioned, Olga, they were not a two-state solution. They were from the river to the sea. There were a chance of genocide. It was never about achieving a new geopolitical solution. It was never about coexistence. It's about a one state, and that's not the Jewish state. And so going forward, what I think that the world must know, and I want to link back to exactly your question. I don't think us, Israel, can in an efficient way counteract all of the propaganda and lies. We've tried to. I've tried to in my old position. But what I now know, or at least I think I know, is that we need to make sure that the world, and Europe in particular, understand that it's not just anti-Semitism. And it's not just about stand with Israel because we're being attacked either by our values or UN organizations or physically attacked by terrorists. It's bigger than that. We need to make the world understand, and we now also have the opportunity to, unfortunately, because of these horrendous circumstances, to make the world understand that this is a call for action. I call it defensive liberalism. I was head of, among other things, in my previous role of public diplomacy. So I had to, all the time, try to advocate to the world how we are, in fact, a liberal democracy, but we're not the same. We're not exactly like you. And it took me years to perfect the argument of saying we're not France and we're not Canada and we're not Britain. We're different, but we're still a democracy and a liberal one. And the difference is we are under constant threat. We are a liberal democracy having to balance between the need to defend these values in order for them to exist the next day. So it's a very tricky situation, but instead of us having to defend our reputation, I think we should reach a hand and say, we are Israel, we are the case study. We've been doing this for so long, and now all of the other countries, all of the Western societies, they now have to write a new playbook on how to keep your values and fight for them while having to sometimes balance the two in order for them to survive. And I think, and going back to where I started, about the new change, especially in Europe, Europe has been severely, Europe is still carrying around the scars of World War II and the Shoah. And I think there's a dichotomy of, are you a liberal or a fascist? When in fact, there's a very wide spectrum between being liberal and becoming a fascist. And safeguarding democracies and safeguarding liberal values is not a slippery slope, as people tend to say. It really isn't. We've been practicing this for decades now. We know that we need to give all the rights and minorities and gay rights and women's rights and be a strong democracy, that it has been put to the test many times in the past. But we also know that if we're not gonna defend our liberal values, there will not be anyone to promote liberal ideas anymore in this world. And so I think that the solution for where we're heading right now is for Western countries, for all Western nations, to update their operating system and say, yes, we know there's a dark path that can be taken. We're not going to go there, but we also know that sitting still and being fearful of maybe harming our democracies or our values might make our values extinct. And so I advocate for defensive liberalism, and I think that Europe and the Western world should join Israel in this effort. And it's an intricate one, and it's a delicate one to balance. But you know what? When you sit down and think about it clearly, without labels, you know what's right, and you know that the two can exist, and I think Israel is living proof for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Idan. It's an immense pleasure to sit on a panel where all my three panelists keep nodding throughout the time. And I really want to thank you for your support and for understanding profoundly the challenge ahead of us. Idan, you spoke about basically the war of ideas, that almost constitutes the Third World War today. To my mind, the difference between Russian propaganda and anti-Israel propaganda, in its essence, is not much different. It is based on distorting truths and seeking to weaponize ideas and how we manipulate the public opinion to allow us to push for our political agenda. NGO Monitor was created 20 years ago with back then a very unique mandate, and that is to study the process of weaponization of human rights. And I think today, in 2025, everyone understands exactly what it is that we do. But back then, everyone thought that it's a crazy idea, that something like that might even exist. I want to challenge you a bit with, and we're short on time, with a very different picture across Europe on this issue, and particularly how governments address it. Especially since October the 7th, different governments have taken different positions in Europe. You have Germany, that has proliferated itself as one of Israel's greatest friends, not only in words, but also in actions. In November 2024, the German parliament, Bundestag, passed a resolution that basically says anyone who doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist and defend itself cannot enjoy any type of support of the German government. In a way, it's revolutionary, as basic as it sounds, right? Only a few months later, the Dutch parliament made a similar took a similar step, and both are now looking into how to implement it. And we know that Germany has actually taken concrete steps. They have cut funding to Israeli organizations who refuse to recognize Israel's right to exist. The German Minister of Justice even suggested that receiving German citizenship should be conditioned by this as well. But then on the backdrop of that, we have the European Parliament, the European Union, that just committed to 1.6 billion euros in funding to the PA, no conditions attached. Although in July last year, they signed a memorandum of understanding that basically said the PA has to reform the education. They should do something about UNRWA, right? They should do something about the institutional anti-Semitism coming out of the PEA, and this is separate from Hamas, right? And what happened on October the 7th. Then we have the Spanish prime minister that just this week basically accused Israel of genocide. And then we're sitting in Paris, Macron is deliberating to recognize the Palestinian state. Again, no conditions attached. And it begs the question, what is the pathway moving forward between Israel and it's not a dual relationship between Israel, European states, and the local Jewish communities, because at the end of the day, when I speak to the officials around the world, I tell them it is not the Israelis that suffer from anti-Semitism. It is actually, even when anti-Semitism is inspired by the conflict or something that has transpired in Israel, the ones that suffer the most are the members of the local Jewish communities. So I'd like to have your take, and we are short on time, so but I'm curious to know what you think is the way forward.
Well, I would say it's an issue for all European countries, and I'm very impressed by what has been clearly said and made by the German authorities. I think the new coalition will be even more firm on this, but it has been a constant fact. But the truth is, you were speaking about the Jewish community in Belgium and this Shoah protection being now seen. The fact is, it's also the case in Germany. And when you hear the Berlin police chief explaining that Jews and gays should not go in certain areas of Berlin, when I read the news, I thought it was a hoax, you know. It was true. And it was not in Berlin 1935. It's in Berlin 2025. So I think it's a broad issue going through the whole continent. And I would maybe, yes, of course, we were nodding during the whole speeches because I feel so much, of course, in agreement with what you said. But I would maybe have a very slight disagreement about one point. I do not think that anti-Semitism is a hatred floating in the air or a monster that has always been living. I mean, it's a real concrete phenomenon that we are seeing now in concrete parts of the society, and we have to name it, you know. Charles Péguy was saying, you need courage to say what you see, but you also need courage to see what you see. And it's maybe sometimes lacking in also in our authorities because we do not want to see what is happening. And what is happening is that today, the contemporary threat, I do not speak of what has happened in the past decades, but the contemporary threat is that in Muslim communities, we have a huge anti-Semitism that is not fought inside the Muslim communities by Muslim authorities. And this is what is happening right now. And this is exactly the reason why so many politicians, sadly, are now making this an electoral bet that they will win votes on anti-Semitic speech. This is exactly what we are facing today because of this trend happening through the change in our European societies. I do not see it has always been the case, and it has always come from this horizon, but today it's where we see it. And the fact is, our adversaries are now using our institutions from the inside. It's the reason why NGO monitoring is so important. We are fighting in the European Parliament every day with my group. We are fighting to defend UNRWA. We are fighting to stop this naivety of European institutions financing anti-Semitism. Because it's exactly what is happening. Let me tell you a very short story. A few weeks ago, I learned that in the monitoring group of Europol, the European Police Agency, in the monitoring board of Europol, one organization was candidate to enter this monitoring. The surveillance group was ENAR, European Network Against Racism. It looks nice, isn't it, being against racism? But the fact is that behind ENAR we have a broad range of associations connected to Muslim Brotherhood and spreading anti-Semitism in a very clear and explicit way, you know. And there were the ones, for example, fighting against the French government when he decided to dissolve the CCIF, who had been behind the attacks against Samuel Paty. You know, so they were taking sides with people spreading terror in France and in Europe. And ENAR, an anti-racist organization, supposedly was to enter, in fact connected to Muslim Brotherhood, to enter a monitoring group of Europol. We were fighting against it, but in the European institution, no one would have seen the problem if we would not have been there to say there is an issue there. And so the fact is we need to give up on this naive attitude against politicians who are using anti-Semitism as an electoral fuel and against organizations who are spreading anti-Semitic hate inside our institutions and using them against us.
Now, we ran out of time, but can I give one line for for both panelists to just say the final conclusions, or no, we're being censored? Well, I'm really sorry. We're out of time, and I'm being told that we have to be disciplined. But I think it just shows that this conversation, this was only a beginning, and that we need to hopefully throughout the day today engage with our panelists and both commend them for your leadership, moral and political, but also consult with you on how to translate this into practical policies. I really want to thank you for taking the time this morning and for everything you do.